Thanks for joining me again. This is Danny Cardwell from thoughtwrestler.blogspot.com, and I want to talk about Social Security today. But before I start, I want to read a passage. June 20th, 1980. Unless Congress acts, the Social Security Fund will run out of money to pay retirement and survivors' benefits by late 1981 or early 1982. My whole life I've heard politicians talk about Social Security, altering the benefits system, changing the way the benefits are distributed, and I've heard talk even of privatizing Social Security. And my advice for senior citizens is to please do not let your children steal your future from you. There are three main components to Social Security. There's the old age retirement benefits, there's the survivors benefits, and there's the disability insurance. Social Security is funded through taxpayers. As they work, a certain percentage of their money is taken and put into the Social Security Trust Fund. It is true that the Social Security Trust Fund is dwindling, but that does not mean that Social Security will cease to exist. I've also heard talks that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme, and those talks are even more disheartening than the fact some of your children seek to cut benefits that you've worked hard to deserve and earn. A Ponzi scheme is named after Charles Ponzi, and it's a scam in which people invest in a pyramid scheme in which new investors pay dividends to old investors. Social Security is completely different. As long as there's workers, which I'm almost certain that they haven't planned on outsourcing every aspect of our economy, but as long as there's workers in the United States of America, there will always be money in the trust fund. Now, the reality is that the greatest generation, the generation of seniors now, it's more of them than it has been in previous years, and there's less workers. And that is a real problem to take into account. But before we would privatize it, there are other means that we could do. We could means test it in which seniors that have more income, that are well off, they could receive less benefits. And then there are ways that we can reduce certain benefits or test the services that are rendered to seniors and make sure it works. But this talk of cutting Social Security altogether or privatizing it is completely reckless. And it's brought about through some of it as well-intentioned, but it's almost a short-sighted approach to solving the problem. There's no person that I know that would walk up to a widow at a funeral and say that, well, we know your husband helped pay the majority of the bills or a portion of the bills, and we understand your loss, but we're not going to be able to help you. No one would do that, and yet, in the abstract, people will talk about cutting the funds. No one would go to a medical unit where someone's doing rehabilitation on a debilitating injury and tell them that they're on their own. And yet, this is what we're talking about. So, this is how important it is, and a lot of it is drawn by fear. I hate to say it, but there are members of my generation whose parents did maybe did too good a job of raising them, in that they're not used to adversity, and that any adversity causes them to panic and look for the most drastic solutions to problems. And I don't know how you can solve that other than to say, you know, our parents worked for this money. They paid into a system to take care of retirees, disabled folks, and widows when they were young and working. And this system should be in place for them. I know myself, I have 3 other siblings, and if each of us gave my parents the amount of money that it cost them to raise us, they wouldn't have to worry about Social Security. So this idea that redistributing wealth is a bad thing, it's funny that you only hear people that are well-to-do or in a working position speak against redistribution of wealth. The beneficiaries of redistributed wealth never say anything against it. When I was young and wanted tennis shoes or a basketball or whatever it was that my heart desired, and I asked my parents for it, they didn't give me excuses on why they couldn't. If there were things that could be gotten, they would make the necessary sacrifices, save up, and provide for that need. And it just irks me to think that in the most vulnerable times in some of our parents' lives, that there are those amongst my generation that would seek to cut them off from what, for many of them, is the difference between impoverished living, dignity, and the ability to take care of themselves. So my idea is that parents become more civically involved in what's going on, pay more attention to these debates, and make your voice heard. It's a shame that we have to keep going back to you guys to save this country, but that might be your burden in this life. You might have to continue saving this country until your dying days.